Here in studio with me is Green Party TD Nessa Harrigan and People Before Profit TD Paul Murphy. I want to come to you first, Nessa Harrigan. What's the government's decision around the thinking on reducing the PUP payment? Because it seems that you think people who are currently receiving that payment don't want to go back to work.
Well, first of all, I would completely reject that. And I have seen some commentary around the idea that, people don't want to work and students are sitting at home and having a nice summer. And I think that's really unfair.
No, that's actually not what I'm getting at. What I'm saying is by reducing the payment, you're saying that people actually need to be incentivised to go back to work. Let's start cutting it from September. We'll cut it again in November. And by the time we reach February, you'll be on €200.
Well, I think the PUP was always going to have to be phased out, and that was never going to be a pleasant process, and that was always going to be a contested thing. I think my concern is less around that issue and more around the idea that, across the EU and certainly in Ireland, we're working on the basis that we're on the other side of the pandemic, and I wouldn't be entirely confident that that's the case. And so I think I would like to see a little bit more language around discretionary measures within that, because, we're looking at the Indian variant. We don't really know how that's going to impact people. And so I think there is an argument around the phasing in, but it's not a cliff edge as it's been described today. It's the last phase is February 2022. I think there's a larger question
with the decision that was made today and the announcement around it.
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, I think there's a larger discussion here around welfare payments in general and whether they're enough. For me, I think €2,003 of unemployment benefit isn't actually enough. And we have seen the establishment of a welfare and taxation commission that hopefully will look at that. I think there's a larger discussion, particularly for particular groups that might be, lone parents, people with disabilities. Are they consistently living in poverty in this state? That's not acceptable. The PUP was always going to be phased out. It's being phased out gradually. Yeah. But there's a larger conversation that we now need to have to ensure that nobody is living long-term in poverty.
And I don't think anyone expects the PUP payment to be around forever. But as long as we're in a pandemic and people can't go back to the jobs that they were in before the pandemic, the argument is that payment still needs to be there. So removing it in September, is it too soon?
Well, it's a phased removal by February 2022.
And it will take some people on the lower earnings scale, lower payment, it will take them off it altogether come September.
Well, I think on the other side, we've tried to put in some measures. So, for example, we've announced the basic income for artists who are a particularly affected group, a 10 million fund for students who might be returning to education in September. This isn't necessarily an easy thing to calibrate and get right, but we're going to have to start somewhere as the country starts to reopen.
OK, Paul Murphy, we have to start somewhere.
Well, the government is choosing to start by hitting the incomes of those workers who were most affected by COVID, who lost their jobs. And contrary to what NASA says, there is a cliff edge. There's a cliff edge, for example, for students. Students, no matter what rate of COVID payments that they're on, will have all of their income cut on the 7th of September. And that reflects a view, clearly in government, that, this is just money that people have on the side. Whereas clearly this is money, these are people who, the only reason they qualify is because they were working previously, they have to have been, and now they're losing their income that they may rely on to be able to go to college.
What do you make of the overview today was, yes, look, we are pulling back on the PUP payments, but in line with that, there's going to be retraining, there's going to be additional supports for people, there's going to be sector-specific supports in place so that people aren't going to be, staring down the barrel of doom come September, coming into the winter ahead. Would you agree with that? Would you accept that there is a path forward and there is a plan and it's not going to leave people completely in the lurch?
I think, unfortunately, it's a plan that is reminiscent of the plan post-banking crisis, whereby the approach of the government was to place the burden onto ordinary people in terms of cuts to public services, increased taxes, property tax, household tax, water charges, and cuts to people's income, while bailing out the banks. So the main thrust of the government's proposals are to continue to support businesses. In the case of small businesses, of course, we agree. But look at what's facing ordinary people. You have cuts to income. That's 40% cuts to people who can't afford to take it. You have increases to property tax coming. You have a double rent increase coming in July for many people. So on both ends, people are being hit now extremely, extremely hard.
The argument, this isn't recovery, this is austerity.
Well, I think we need to be really careful with our language here, and I noticed your previous speaker used the word austerity, and
well, in terms of
no, spending cuts related
cuts
spending
that
cuts but spending cuts that are made to appease bond markets. That's the definition of austerity. This isn't austerity. Now, we could contest and discuss, whether there's no spending cuts included in this at all. In fact, but I think the other side of the coin to the PUP phase out are those supports for employers, the continuation of the support schemes, the continuation of the wage subsidy scheme, the 2-year continuation of tax warehousing, the extension of VAT to the tourism industry, and the commercial rates waiver.
So all supports for business, though, and
those
workers
are
are being
supports for
cut.
jobs.
But
those are supports for jobs.
But supports
so
for businesses are continuing.
work.
Supports for business are continuing to next year. But if you're a student, you're losing all of your PUP on the 7th of September.
Most people on PUP are continuing to receive something until February 2022. That's a 7-month. That's not a cliff edge. That's a slope.
But you think it's okay for students to lose all of their income on the 7th of September?
There's a 10 million fund put in place.
You think it is okay for them if someone is relying to go back in college to September, they're relying on this income because they work in hospitality, as huge numbers of students do. You think it's okay for them to lose
I'm somebody who worked the whole way through university. Nobody was paying for me. I had to do that myself. So I personally wouldn't massively be in favour of cutting PUP completely for students. However, I'm very glad to see that there's some kind of compensation funds so that people aren't left in the lurch.
Okay, well, singer Mary Coughlin is joining us now via Skype. And Mary, it's been a tough 15 months for artists like yourself. You heard the news today about the decision to cut back on the PUP payment from September. What's your reaction as someone who has been relying on this payment to get through the last 15 months?
Thousands of artists, actors, writers, dancers, musicians, lighting technicians, what have you, have been relying on the PUP payment for the past 16 months. We haven't been out on the streets screaming about who opened 1 week earlier than us. We don't have any date for going back to work. Minister Martin, I know, has been working with the LPSS on getting funding out to us. She announced that in April, but nothing has materialised so far. I believe that sometime in June they will make an announcement whereby they will give us, they will give venues some support so that they can employ us. And we can work. I don't want to be on the dole. I don't want to be on the PUP. I've had no other income this year apart from the PUP.
And how has that left you financially, Mary?
What?
How is that
financially?
Yeah. Just give us an impact.
It's been horrific.
Because there's plenty of people out there who are also watching who haven't been remotely affected by this pandemic. They've stayed in their jobs, they've worked from home. Yes, it's been difficult, but they haven't faced what people in your industry and other industries have faced. So just to give an insight, Mary, as to how tough it's been for you and for others like you.
It's been very tough for me personally. I don't have huge income, I don't have huge savings. I spent all that on an album. I have a band, I have 4 guys in the band, I have a sound technician and I have lighting. And they're on PUP payments, and some of them share houses with 4 other people, and they're living on between 35 and 50 euro a week after their bills are paid. And I mean, their only income is music. They love to play music. Normally they'd be out working 5, 6, 7 nights a week, sometimes doing 2 gigs a night, doing tours with me and other acts, other artists. We have nothing. It was taken away from us, and on the 11th or whatever date it was in March. My last gig was the 7th of March, and I had a tour planned, 35 concerts all over Europe and festivals, Glastonbury, everything, and it was gone, and it hasn't come back, and nobody has given us a date for starting. They're talking about running gigs, like 2 gigs, one at the Phoenix Park and one at the National Concert Hall, a lovely one down the Roisin Dove, I believe, a session, a gig in the INEC, and the rest of us still have nothing, no word from anybody, no concrete plan forward. And we haven't, as I said, kicked up a fuss about it. We have done as we were asked to do. And I know that they're working hard to try and sort it out.
Okay.
And I know it's a pandemic, but we have to have something.
We have to.
And announcing today, and that's Horrigan talking about language, be careful of the language you use. Somebody should have been told that to me, Al Martin, today, when he should have been careful of the language that he used when he announced that he was cutting us off the PUP at the rate of 50 quid a month from September. To say that to people at a time like this, when there is no plan forward for us, is absolutely criminal and insane. And there are people really, really on the edge in my business and in other households tonight. And listening to that kind of stuff is just, it's not acceptable. No. And we have put up with it for too long.
Now, so what do you think of what Mary is saying there?
Well, I think the arts industry have been particularly badly hit, and there is no easy answer to Mary's, particularly her issue around, when can we get back out? Because really we don't know.
But a pandemic didn't offer much hope, did it?
Well, a pandemic is not necessarily an easy thing to plan through, and the idea that we could give a date, there are, as Mary pointed out, there are pilot concerts and events happening, and it'll be very much a wait and see to make sure that it's safe for people to do so. But I think it is worth pointing out that the number one request from the Arts Council was a basic income. Okay. And we have tried to deliver that, and that's certainly in the economic plan today.
Okay, well, the argument is still there, and we're hearing Mary articulated so well about the cutting of the payment there and the impact it will have on her sector. But I want to move on now to the local property tax, because that was a surprise inclusion today. Paul, homes built after 2013 will now be included in this property tax. People who are living in homes that were built before then are already paying a tax. The argument being made is now that was unfair, and we want to make this equal across the board.
That's right. The government is a big fan of equality, equality of misery. So they want to bring down the PUP to the level of below the poverty line of €203 that those on many social welfare payments, including disability allowance, get, and they want to bring up property tax rate so that everybody gets to pay the same.
It's something that has been talked about for years. It was brought up on 3 different occasions and rejected. So is there ever a good time to include it, and is there ever a good time to announce it? Would you accept that there has to be a bit of equality across the board if you're going to have a local property tax?
But I'm for equality by getting rid of a local property tax, which is a tax on the family home. So instead, I think we need to be taxing those who got very, very wealthy through the course of the pandemic. Across the world, billionaires increased their wealth by 60%. Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, is the best example, going from 100 billion to 200 billion. But Dennis O'Brien in this country increased his wealth by €4 million every single day during the pandemic. If we imposed, for example, a 3% wealth tax on the richest 1% of people in this country, we'd raise €3.6 billion. Okay. Even the IMF, for example, is calling for a wealth tax at the moment. I want to bring you in here on this. It was a controversial decision that was made today around the property tax, and people will already feel, look, we've had a really rough time of it over the past 15 months, and now we're going to be lumped with the property tax, and actually the homes are going to be re-evaluated, so it's going to be a lot more than it was in 2013.
The point of this plan was to be a medium-term economic plan, and the SRI and IFAC and all of those people have been saying to the government, you need to be more serious about medium-term planning. I have to say, I think it's always incredible to me that a party of the left in Ireland, and it's only in Ireland that this happens, would repudiate property taxes. Most wealth in Ireland is held in property. That is a wealth tax. And if we're serious about broadening the tax base, and I actually thought it was unwise. I thought it was unwise.
Family home tax, because it's.
But sorry. Deputy Murphy's not suggesting that we reform the property tax so that it's fairer. For example, pensioners sometimes struggle to pay it. So you have a very expensive asset and you don't necessarily have any money in your pocket. And I absolutely take that point seriously. Our own policy is site value tax, which would be much fairer. But Deputy Murphy is not reform the property tax so that it's fairer. He's suggesting that we just scrap it.
No, we're suggesting we actually tax the property of the rich.
No, you just said you wanted to get rid of it.
Exactly, because the local property tax is a tax on every single home.
Most wealth in Ireland is held in property.
But most wealth in Ireland, Nasa, is held by the richest people. The richest 10% control more than 50%.
Most of the wealth in Ireland is held in property, and you don't want to tax that.
But let's go after the property, the yachts, the investment funds, the pension funds of the top top 1% in this country. They're the ones who have the wealth.
Do you
The
think
top
that's
10%
going to
have more than
fund
50%.
everything? Do you think that's going to pay for all the services that are required at local level?
Absolutely not. Let's also tax the corporations, right? You see today, actually, interestingly, the negative effect of the corporate tax haven model for Ireland. Ireland is getting from the EU about €1 billion from the European Fund. Croatia, which is smaller, is getting €6 billion. Finland, which is roughly the same size and has a bigger economy, is getting more than €2 billion. And the reason for that is because of our leprechaun economics.
I completely agree.
It's because it's based on GDP.
He's completely right.
OK, there we'll leave it. That's all we'll have time for. My thanks to singer Mary Coughlin and People Before Profit TG Paul Murphy. NASA Harrigan will be staying with us.
Thanks, Lashkan Corley. I also want to follow up on the question of the 4-day week. The 4-day week Ireland coalition has highlighted how moving to a 4-day week can reduce carbon emissions by up to 16%, while also improving people's work-life balance and their mental health. It's a very important demand raised by the trade unions, by the environmental movement, and it makes up an important part of the eco-socialist Green New Deal that we advocate. Earlier this month, the Taoiseach said that it was not something that his department was even considering. I want to ask the Taoiseach if you and your department are considering it, and if not, will you? Too often, I think, tackling climate change is presented as being eco-austerity, greenwashing, new taxes on workers, cutting back on people's living standards. But it absolutely doesn't have to be and must not be that way. Instead, an eco-socialist approach is about raising the quality of people's lives and tackling climate change together, transforming people's lives for the better and avoiding the climate catastrophe which is on the way. The demand for a 4-day week without loss of pay is a perfect example for that, and it allows a united campaign of the workers' movement and the environmental movement to come together to fight for it. Thanks, Lashkan Corla. Taoiseach, last week I questioned the Taoiseach about the double rent hike facing renters this July as landlords attempt to impose 2 years' worth of rent increases in one fell swoop, something allowed in the legislation that the government introduced. The Taoiseach seemed genuinely surprised and unaware that this was possible, and he said that it was not the government's intention to allow for such 8% rent increases. But the question is, are you and the government going to bring in the emergency legislation needed this month to stop it from happening? For the average renter in Dublin, an 8% rent increase would be an increase of €140 a month. An incredible amount of money that is unaffordable for many, especially considering the cuts coming down the line in terms of the PUP. I think we should be extending the rent freeze. I think we should be taking action to bring rents down. But at the very least, Taoiseach, we need emergency legislation to stop this double rent hike happening. If the government refuses to do it, People Before Profit will bring forward our own legislation, and we will make sure that it is a major issue in the by-election in Dublin Bay South. So, which is it going to be, Taoiseach? Will you bring forward the legislation that is needed, or are you going to abandon renters to landlords yet again?
Well, and Minister O'Brien is examining that situation in relation to the prospect or the possibility, which we do not want, in terms of a doubling up in terms of rent increases, and that situation is being actively considered and looked at by the Minister, as we speak. And again, we will do what we can again to support tenants, to support through the legislation that we've passed already, to protect people from eviction and to protect tenants in terms of security of tenure, but above all then to create more housing, build more houses, get more houses available for people across the length and breadth of the country, and make sure that the councils can get housing projects through, get them passed, get them built, instead of at the moment there's been too much delay in some councils, too much negativity in my view, and too many projects that have been gathering dust for far too long.
Thank you, Taoiseach.